Welcome to the Fear and Greed Business Interview. I'm Sean Aylmer. It'll come as no surprise that Australians are having to direct more of their spending to essential living expenses rather than the things they'd prefer to spend their money on. It's the reality of the cost of living crisis, and nobody sees this more clearly than our biggest bank. This time last year, we spoke to Wade Tubman from CommBank IQ, a joint venture between Commonwealth Bank and AI company Quantium. The group uses de-identified data from 7 million Commonwealth Bank customers to track changes in spending. I wanted to check in again and see what's changed, where the pressure points are and how Australians are coping with the rising cost of living. Wade Tubman is CommBank IQ's Head of Innovation and Analytics. Wade, welcome back to Fear and Greed.
Thank you for having me back.
I know we did cover this last time, but it's worth revisiting. Take me through the key components of household finances. You have, income, mortgage, savings, etc. Just take me through those elements.
Yeah, so I like to build a sort of a mental model of the Australian consumer or the Australian household, a bit like a personal P&L and balance sheet. If you think about your key sources of funds, you have your salary, and for most Australians, that's about it. Then we have your big outgoings, and your house is the big outgoing. For a third of Australians, they're renting, a third have a mortgage, and a third own outright. So for 2/3 of Australians, your house or putting a roof over your head is your biggest outgoing. But then beyond that, there's just a whole myriad of life's expenses. And, unfortunately, there's not a lot of data around how people spend. So what we decided to do was to understand how these pressures, and the pressures that we're facing are largely caused by significant hikes in rentals. Rents are up second year in a row with double-digit rent increases, and obviously mortgage rates are up as well. But what is this actually doing to Australia's spending habits? But more importantly, what is it doing to their lives? So what we've done is we've analysed the spending behaviour of 7 million Australians. We've scaled that to be representative of all 26 million Australians out there, and sort of tried to dive below the averages, tried to sort of really get inside all of the different decisions people are making week in, week out in response to this.
Okay, so maybe we need to start breaking it down by, is it age or demographics, or because I want to get into some of that kind of below the averages stuff. What about younger Australians? What are they spending more on, spending less on?
So if we sort of start with the premise that the key driver of the current situation is that housing situation, you've got to remember that younger people are at an earlier stage in their housing journey. So if you think about your life, you move out of home, probably into a rental first, maybe a share house or maybe on your own, and then you potentially move into a sort of a first home buyer's mortgage type of situation, your own home. So we do have a prevalence of those two groups in the younger age groups, and that reveals itself in the data. When we look at how young people are spending, we find that it's a very different pattern compared to middle-aged and older Australians. And unfortunately, at the moment, when we look at young people, we find that they're having to make a number of changes to their spending and their lifestyle. And I guess the key finding was they're not only cutting back on the things they want, sort of that discretionary spending, which is a really good litmus test for confidence, they're also cutting back on essentials, which shows that they're, really having to budget, and they're really having to sort of, prioritize what's important to them and what isn't.
When you say essentials for a younger person, and many years ago, Wade, I'd know exactly what you're talking about. Alas, now not so sure. Are you talking about, obviously, housing, but beyond housing, are you talking about things like utilities, insurance, that type of stuff?
Yeah, so when we have a look, we within CommBank IQ have about 380 different spending categories, and we look through all of them and just decide what's essential and what's not. I often have discussions with my wife around what's essential and what isn't.
Yeah, we all do that.
We all do that. But the reality for this analysis is we're talking about putting food on the table through supermarkets, but also specialty food and liquor. We're talking utilities, so energy, gas, telco, NBN, things like that. We're talking talking key insurances, so health insurance, home insurance, car insurance. We're talking medical, so all the doctors, medical services, pharmacies. We're talking getting around, so sort of your car and your petrol or public transport, or there's an increasing trend towards non-public transport, so ride share, car share, especially amongst younger people. And for younger people also, we're talking sort of education. So they're all the essentials, and for younger Australians, that makes up half their wallet, all of those categories.
Stay with me, Wade. We'll be back in a minute. My guest this morning is Wade Tubman, CommBank's IQ Head of Innovation and Analytics. What about we flip it then? And so if housing is kind of the dividing line in a sense, if we flip it to older Australians who have paid off a lot of their home or own their home outright, I presume the results are going to be different in that cohort.
Yeah, so the first thing is when we start talking about the construct of the wallet, for older people, just the headline wallet looks different. So older people actually have a much higher proportion of their spend going to essentials. And that's because as we get older, I guess we get more commitments, and also assurance and comfort is more important to us. So for example, things like insurances are very important to older people. They're the second highest sort of category for older Australians, whereas insurance is a lot less important in the wallets of younger people. Also, then when we have a look at things like sort of medical, doctors, pharmacies, things like that, when we look at that, we find that older people right now are almost the exact opposite of younger people. We find they're actually increasing their spend on discretionary areas, but they're also increasing their spend on essentials, whereas younger people, as we just said, are doing the reverse. They're decreasing in both those categories. So you're sort of almost at polar opposite ends of the spectrum.
And is that primarily because older people don't have rent/mortgages, or at least generally are less likely to have rent/mortgages than younger people? Is that kind of why they've got more money?
Yeah, so there's always a danger of averages, and there's certainly plenty of older people out there who, could be on the government pension, could be renting and things like that. There's, as I keep saying, there's 26 million stories out there.
Yeah.
But on average, yes, absolutely. On average, your 65 plus Australian, has going to have cleared the bulk or all of their mortgage, and potentially has savings left. And if you've got savings, obviously interest rates now are a better source of income than they have been over the last decade. So yeah, no, absolutely. Also, when we think about older people, they still have significant wallets. One of the things we looked at was, I guess, how much people spend throughout their lives. And I guess, we sort of forget that actually through our lives, we have different levels of commitments. So the biggest spending ages in our sort of 40s and 50s. And, for many people, that's when you've got families, you've got, a lot of bills coming in. But, if we look at, say, 65 to 70s, they're still spending sort of 80% plus of those peak spending years, despite potentially, being empty nesters. So throughout our life, we do have, I guess, a slight change to our overall spending, but I guess what we spend on changes a lot. Our priorities change.
Does it matter where you live? I live in Sydney, very expensive city. My mum lives in country New South Wales, less expensive.
Yeah, so again, sort of I wouldn't say the elephant in the room, but the premise here is that a lot of the base stresses that are driving some of the behavioural change we're seeing here is due to rentals and mortgages, which in one way or another are largely driven by property prices. We do find that there is very significant differences in spending across the country, and that's even allowing for the demographic differences. There's certainly older suburbs and younger suburbs. What we find is that unlike other situations, if we look back to the GFC, for example, and other situations like that, regional Australia often does it a bit tougher. But certainly now and over the last sort of 18 months odd that we've tracked this, regional Australia has outperformed our big metro centres. In particular, Sydney and Melbourne have exhibited a high degree of weakness in spending throughout that time, and you could see strong correlations between that and those high rentals and those high property prices.
Wade, where do we go from here? Can you, from the data, get a sense that we're at the peak or the nadir of the cost of living crisis? or is it too early to tell? I like to leave every one of these interviews with a little bit of hope here. So far, it hasn't been great.
Yeah.
Where are we up to?
Where are we up to? So, the one thing that has happened is, when this became a topic that everyone started talking about, couldn't go to a barbecue and not have someone mention it.
Yeah.
Sort of a year or 18 months ago, it was about rent, it was about the mortgage and interest rates, and it was about inflation, just everything going up in price. So one thing that has eased there is inflation. Back then we were talking 7-8% inflation. Now we're talking inflation in the threes. So one of those burdens has lifted. But now when we think about it, there are still some, I guess, hard to shake nuggets in there, and insurance is one of them. In the most recent data, we find that while inflation, has come down a lot, it's like less than half of the rate it was a year ago. Insurance is up 10%, for some groups even up 12%, and that is having an impact on them. But a lot of the categories where we did see that high inflation, have really eased back. So where that leaves us, and I guess it's hard for me to sort of come up with an analogy or description. But what I have been sort of saying to people is, maybe last year when we have a look at the changes to spending people were making, they had 2 feet on the brakes. Like we really saw some significant changes in how people were spending. We saw a lot of categories, people were choosing to cut back by double digits. We were talking about 10 or 15% cuts in those areas people were choosing to do. Those numbers have eased back a lot. Like if I was to say anything, we haven't got 2 feet on the brakes anymore, and consumers, maybe have 1 foot on the brake, or maybe even just feathering the brake. It's maybe not the best analogy, but if you're after sort of that glimmer of hope, I would definitely say the way the figures are trending is that we've made many of the changes to our lives that we've needed to as a result of these pressures. So we've, I guess, already taken a lot of the medicine. And certainly now, if we sort of look to the year ahead, I think there's a lot of people looking towards the green shoots. We've got the tax cuts coming in the middle of the year. We're looking for interest rate cuts, maybe at the back end of this year or early next year. And, they're going to have flow-on impacts to that. I can't speak for what's going to happen to rentals over that time. But no, definitely while things are still going down, and that's sort of disappointing for everyone. We'd hope that we would have bottomed out and be on our way out now. Definitely, as I said, a lot of the medicine has been taken. A lot of people have changed their spending, and we're now starting to sort of see a lot of those trends, starting to finish. And as I said, we're all hoping, looking up for the back half of this year.
Wade, thank you for talking to Fear and Greed.
Thank you for having me again.
That was Wade Tubman, CommBank's IQ Head of Innovation and Analytics. This is the Fear and Greed Business Interview. Join us every morning for the full episode of Fear and Greed, daily business news for people who make their own decisions. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your day.